Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Hey, let me begin by saying I just really appreciate all of the fantastic interest in this current study, and I'm trying to address some of the subjects that you have asked me to address. And this subject of the 70 weeks of Daniel chapter 9, 24 and following, was right up there among the top of the issues that you wanted me to address. Now, as I stated when I began this, this could become a really long study. But I don't intend for it to be that. I do want to address the points that you're raising in your comments, the really good questions that have been raised. Now, one of the questions that I have been asked about over and over again, and a good solid question, if you believe, as I do, that the 70 weeks ended in AD 70, then how do you harmonize that with the fact that Jesus died after the 69th week, which means that puts his death in 33 AD in the 70th week? Well, the 7th week was supposed to be 7 years, right? Well, that means there's got to be a gap between Jesus' death in the 70th week, first half of the 70th week, and the second half of the week. Preston, you've got a gap. Now look, just like everyone else, I've studied that, struggled with that. I used to take the position that the 70 weeks was not even a chronological period of time. It was a symbolic reference based upon the Jubilee concept. Many scholars have held that position down through the years. Meredith Kline, who didn't take that absolute position, but who hinted toward it, is one of those. So anyway, down through the years, I've come to change my views. I'm always willing to change when the evidence demands it. So, top of the list, so to speak, of the questions that you have asked me is, Don, how do you justify a gap of 40 years between the cross and 70 AD? Well, I'm going to get to that. All right? Before I get to that, however, I want to address, and I'm going to address, the dispensational view of the gap. The dispensational view of Daniel chapter 9 goes like this. Daniel 9, 24 and following foretold the establishment of the everlasting kingdom, the messianic kingdom, if you please. Jesus came to fulfill those promises and that hope. He offered the kingdom to Israel, but Israel rejected that offer. And as Thomas Ice says in the book, End Times Controversy, the Jewish rejection made it, quote, impossible, unquote, for Jesus to fulfill that mission. Therefore, the kingdom offer was withdrawn. It was postponed for so far 2,000 years. And in the place of the kingdom, God established the church. The church was nowhere predicted, nowhere foreseen, nowhere prophesied in the Old Testament, period. Unknown. It was the mystery of God. So remember, the church is not supposed to be foretold anywhere in the Old Testament, but the church will endure until the rapture. The rapture is for the intended purpose of removing the church from the earth, taking it to heaven. And at the rapture, God begins once again to deal with Israel in the 70th week countdown. So the rapture begins the 70-week countdown, the last week of Daniel chapter 9. Now, I'll say more about that. What you have in the 70th week then is the man of sin who signs a peace treaty with Israel, allowing them to rebuild the temple. But after 3.5 years, he breaks that peace treaty and begins to persecute the Jews. sets up the abomination of desolation. And the great tribulation of 3.5 years ensues. At the very height of that persecution, of that great tribulation, the Jews cry out to Yahweh for deliverance and for vindication. Jesus comes out of heaven on the clouds, destroys the man of sin, and establishes the millennial reign along with the Messianic temple. So, in the dispensational view, you have so far a 2,000-year gap between the 69th year and the 70th year. Now, let me reiterate again that Jesus would die, according to Daniel 9:26, after the 69th week. Well, if you're counting to 70, and you count 69, and then you go after the 69th, where does that put you? Put you in the 70th. I'm going to have more to say about that in the next video. In the meantime, I just want to lay the groundwork for what we're going to do. Believe me, rest assured, I will be addressing the question, Preston, how do you explain a 40-year gap between AD 33 and AD 70? Well, I have to tell you, I'm extremely excited about the research I've done. I have presented it in different places at different times. I have even presented it to a friend of mine in Israel who is a top Hebrew scholar, world-renowned. When I presented it to him, he was excited. He said he knew of no one that had ever presented this. That always scares me. He threw it by some others of his top scholar acquaintances. They too were impressed with the explanation. Now, does that prove it's right? Obviously not. I will be presenting my explanation of that after I discuss in depth, no, not 100 videos, but in depth, the dispensational view of the gap theory that says there's a 2,000-year gap. You know, the dispensationalists have told me, hey, look, Don, if, if you can have a 40-year gap, we can have a 2,000-year gap. No, doesn't work. Sorry. Doesn't even come close to working. In the meantime, for you to have the material and to know where I'm going to be going, to have a full explanation of the problems of the dispensational gap theory, you need to get a copy of my book, Seal Up Vision and Prophecy. Now look, I've got to tell you something. I presented this material in a formal public debate with Thomas Ice and Mark Hitchcock in Florida some years ago. When I presented it, they were literally stunned. They refused to even attempt to answer the argument. And I have not ever had one single dispensationalist deal with the argument and the material. So, go to my website, BibleProphecy.com, DonKPreston.com, order the book, Seal Up Vision and Prophecy. When you do, I will give you a free copy of Can God Tell Time? All right, that introduces where we're about to go. Thanks for joining me. I will see you on the flip side as we begin to examine the dispensational gap theory of Daniel chapter 9.